All right. Here we go, Chevre. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Kuf Dalid. We left off on Daf Kuf Gimel, Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are continuing to learn the series of Mishnayos, subsequently Gemaras, that differentiate between certain activities that may be done in the Mikdash, generally based on the rule that Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, versus that same activity that may not be done, Midrabanan, B'Medina, meaning any place outside the Beis HaMikdash. We are learning the Mishnah that speaks about a kohen who is allowed to wrap a gemi, some sort of reed grass, around a wound on his finger, even though it's not mamish directly connected to avodah, but it is, because it's unbecoming, it's unseemly for a kohen during avodah to have an exposed wound. And even though the gemi that the Mishnah is speaking about has a curative, has a medicinal purpose, and generally one may not take any medications on Shabbos, midrabanan, gezerah, that you might grind herbs, by shchika samemanim, but that's the whole point, that ain't shvus b'mikdash. Now that led us into this whole topic of is there a prohibition for a kohen to wear another beged, yitur begadim, shaloi b'makim begadim, if he's not wearing it in the same place where he has to wear his begadim. And as we'll go into another version of this topic on our Mishnah. On Daf Kuf Dalid, we're going to learn another Mishnah, continuing with this series. The Mishnah is going to say that one is allowed to scatter salt on the altar, on the ramp leading up to the altar. What's the issue of scattering salt on the ground? When you put something on the ground, if you are mevatel it, that means if you abandon it there, then you are, so to say, adding to the building. Interesting concept. Midrabanan, even though you're not affixing it there. A great practical example would be, is a person allowed to roll out on Shabbos a nice large rug that you intend to leave on the ground that's connected to the sugya. You're adding to the building, midrabanan. So in the Mikdash, yeah, the Medina, loy. We're going to speak about the permissibility of using a windlass, the mechanisms that you build near a well that make it easy for you to draw the water up. The Mikdash, yeah, the Medina loy. What's the issue with using a windlass? So this is either, it would have been prohibited if not for the Mikdash, because you're making sound, and we're going to get into the whole sugya whether creating sounds, even if they are not musical sounds, whether that's included in the Isur Darabanan, which all originates from don't play musical instruments because you might fix it if it breaks. How far does that extend? That's a machlekes between Rabbi and Ula. Rabbi holds that non-musical sounds are okay to make on Shabbos. Ula holds that even non-musical sounds may not be made on Shabbos. This is a very practical machlekes amirayim. We're going to learn, God willing, a tosfos that brings 2 different approaches in the Rishonim as to who we paskin like. And in this year, we're going to learn the final Mishnah in the Massechta, Kuf Dalid Amid Beis, that speaks about a sheretz that's found in the Beis HaMikdash. It has to be removed. This is both a weekday issue and a Shabbos issue. Weekday issue, because to remove the sheretz, if you were to hold on to it, then you would become tamei. So there's going to be one opinion that says that the kohen is going to use his avneit, his sash, his gartel, even though the gartel will become tamei. But don't forget, my friends, sheretz is an av. if you grab onto the sheretz through the gartel becomes a rishon, but a rishon cannot make Adam into a sheni. But the gartel will become tamei, but you'll get rid of it quickly. The other option is to find a wooden tongue. Pshutei clay eights are not makabel tuma. It might take you longer to find such an instrument, so the tuma will linger longer, but it won't spread because the keli itself will also not become tamei. This is b'chlal what you do during the week. When it happens to be found on Shabbos, now you have another layer. Normally a dead sheretz it's muktzah. Elamah, here again, ain't shvus b'migdash. And here we're going to have a very interesting machlokes as to in what part of the Migdash do we say that we suspend muktzah? Is it anywhere in the Migdash or only in the holier parts? V'chulei, a lot more details. Chavra, let's begin. Again, we left off on Daf Kuf, Gimel, Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We had a Mishnah speaking about a gemi. We had the first version of Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia or Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia, then Rabbi Yechanan, and then Rava. And let's start up now with the other version of this machlekes. It says the Gemara, Lishna Achrina Amrila. There was another way of learning the above back and forth of Amiroim. That after we learned the Mishnah, first comes Amar Rav Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia. That tells us that Lo Yishanu, that a kohen is allowed to wrap a gemi around the wound on his finger. That's dafka a gemi. Abel tziltzil katan. But if he wants to use a small belt, here, chaytzeitz, here again, like we spoke at yesterday, generally chatzitza means an interposition. Here, chatzitza means yitur begadim. A kohen may not put on a belt because it's a beged, and you may not wear your kohen hedyet 4 begadim. Your kohen gadol shmeina begadim, not one more. Now, in our version now, it was Rabbi Yechanan that responded to Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia, which clearly indicates that Rabbi Yechanan argues with him. That Rabbi Yechanan Amar, I disagree with you. Lo yamru chatzitza. The real chatzitza, meaning if there is something in between the beged of the kohen and the body of the kohen, there take v'pachus mishalosh al shalosh elevamakim begadim. This I 100%. If there is something in the place where the beged is laying on the body of the kohen that's getting in between the beged and the body, even only one little thread, that does create your chatzitz. Avol shaloi b'makom begadim daf kuf dalid. Here, if it's shaloi b'makom begadim, so the concept of the typical chatzitz is irrelevant because there's nothing there's nothing being chaitzitz. Again, we're not even speaking about the kohen holding something on the inside of his hand. We're not speaking about having something under the feet of the kohen. That also creates a chatzitza between the hand and the keli, between the feet of the kohen and the ground. We're not speaking about that. If there's an article on the body of the kohen, shaloi b'makom begadim, the only issue would be yitur begadim. Here says Rabbi Yechanan, only shalish al shalish chaytzetzes. Only if it has the size of 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. But pachos mishalish al shalish, then ein chaytzetzes, and this little belt is Rabbi Yechanan basically saying doesn't have that size, so there's nothing wrong with the kohen wearing a belt on a wound, shaloi b'makom begadim. And now l'choura, that is this latter version that we just began today learning is exactly what the Rava Amar Rab Chizda said in the prior version. Now, Rava Amar Rab Chizda, according to this Lishna Achrina, did not say the statement in response to Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia. So now the question is, did Rava argue? Rabbi Yechanan for sure argues with him because Rabbi Yechanan made a statement in response to him. But Lema Pliga, that Rava argues with Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia, right? That clearly rules that a small belt is Yitur Begadim. So the Gemara says, no. Perhaps Rava made a statement not in relation to our conversation. Rava would be moida that if a kohen were to wear a small belt, since it's chashuv, it is considered yitur begadim. So perhaps according to this version, Rava will agree with him. But Rabbi Yechanan for sure does not agree with him because Rabbi Yechanan made a statement that if it's pachus mishalish ein chaytzetzes, not yitur begadim, in response to Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rab Chia's statement on our Mishnah. He said that our Mishnah is only a gemi, not a small belt. Rabbi Yechanan says that a kohen can wear a small belt. So the question now is, Ul Rabbi Yechanan, ad the ishma'in and gemi, why didn't you say the greater chiddush? Lashmeinan, that even a tziltzil cotton may be worn by a kohen. So the Gemara says, no, there is a secondary teachings that the Mishnah can only tell us by giving the example of a gemi, the gemi masi. A gemi also has a curative effect. Small belt does not. A small belt perhaps protects the wound from new, little particles of dirt not going in it, but it doesn't heal it. There is something in this reed grass that actually heals the wound. And the Mishnah wants to tell you the secondary chiddush, which is connected to our series, that since ein shvus b'migdash, as long as it is somehow avoida related, and yes, it is avoida related, not because the avoida would be possible if the wound would be exposed, but it's unseemly. So therefore, the kohen, yes, is allowed even to wear a gemi. All right, Zog the Mishnah.
This is only, sorry, Rabbi. This is only if he's actively doing his mishmar. His mishmar.
For sure, if he's actively doing his mishmar, you can even go more. If it's his base avdei, because they actually broke down the mishmaris into 6 batayav, or on Shabbos. Actually, I take that back because it's on Shabbos, and on Shabbos there wasn't the base av. Very good. So you're right, Yaakov. If it was his mishmar. Okay, says the next Mishnah, Boiskin melach al gabe kevesh, that one is allowed to break and to scatter salt all around on top of the ramp leading up to the altar. Now, before we learn what the issue is, why would you want to scatter salt on the kevesh? Bishvil shelo yachliku, for the kohen not to slip. Rashi says sometimes when it rained, it would be slippery, the kevesh, the ramp. The Rambam says, forget about the rain. There are so many fats being brought up on the Mizbeach. Some of them, so to say, spilled or dripped on the kevesh, and that would be very slippery. So you are allowed to put salt. Now, what's the issue with salt? So we'll see more in the Gemara, like we just mentioned. The issue is that when you put a layer on the ground, if you plan to abandon it there, then it leads you into the issue of boina. Okay, now the problem with boina is that if this is considered boina mido oiraisa, that would not be permitted by Mikdash. So we're going to get all into these details in the Gemara. Next statement in the Mishnah: Umemalin mi boir hagoylo umi boir hagodol bigalgal b'Shabbos. One is allowed to use a galgal, a windlass, right? This cylinder barrel that facilitated you turning it over here, and it lifted up something very heavy over there. You are allowed to use a galgal to draw water either from the well that in the Azara that was called the well that was built by the exiles, Boir HaGoyla. There was another well that was called Boir HaGodol. You are allowed to use it in the Beis HaMikdash, even on Shabbos. Now, what would be the issue? So we'll see in the Gemara, either it made a lot of noise, but if you're going to say that making sound is only prohibited when it's musically connected, so then the issue would be, as we'll see in the Gemara, is that Chazal were afraid that if it would be very easy for you to get water, you might end up watering your plants. See, today we're living in a world that it's very easy for everyone to get water. Then, no, normally getting water was an avodah. People were more mindful how they spent their water. But again, that's the Isur D'Rabbanan, and in the Beis HaMikdash, Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. However, outside the Beis HaMikdash, generally, you may not use a galgal to draw water, with one exception, that Umi Be'er Hakir, there was a Hakir well. We'll see soon where, not exactly where it was, but what the word Hakir means. But there was one location out of the Beis HaMikdash that there was a well called the Hakir well, that there they did allow us to use it, but only on Yom Tov, as we'll see in the Gemara, more details about this Hakir Be'er. Okay. So it says the Gemara, Rami Leirav Ika. He pointed out the following contradiction. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, you are allowed to break down salt and scatter it on top of the ramp. Now our Mishnah is telling you that which is allowed to be done in the Mikdash. So in other words, infers Vaitrav Ika the Mikdash in, but the Medina loy. The problem is, we learned in a Braisa that Chatzah sheniskalkala b'meik shamim. If a Chatzah got ruined during the rain season, maybe Teven, you are allowed to bring straw umeradeba and spread it out and make a new floor, so to say, out of straw. So That's at Chatzir, that's not in the temple. There's no problem at all. So the Gemara says, Shani Tevin, straw, even after you use straw to, so to say, fix your floor, putting a new layer on your floor, you don't plan to abandon it there because straw also could be used to feed animals. Straw was used in construction, and that's the key. Since the Lema Vatale, but you don't intend to abandon it there, then you're not doing anything wrong. Where is there an issue when you plan to abandon it? And Rashi says over here, if you plan to abandon it to have a kibinyan and salt, especially after the feet of the Kahanim trample on it, again, this is the Havamina, it's not going to be fit for anything else. So you do plan to abandon it. That's something that otherwise, if not in the Midrash, would have been usher, but that's the novelty that the Midrash it's mutter. Okay, so what's over here? Hai melech, the salt that you are leaving on the kevish, hechidami, if indeed you are leaving it there, you are abandoning it there, like we mentioned. What else can you use the salt for after people trampled on it? Well, here we have a problem. Problem is komaisav abinyan. Now, there's different ways of learning the Gemara. We'll learn it the way Rashi learns it with the parentheses. The komaisav abinyan doesn't mean that it's binyan doiraisa. And if it's only binyan the Rabbanan, then what's the Gemara's kasha? We keep on learning that in the Migdash, right, ain't shvuz b'migdash. But there's another issue, not Shabbos issue, a Migdash issue. Let's read the parentheses. And it says regarding the building of the Beis HaMikdash, including everything in there, that hakoil b'chsav miyat Hashem olai yiskil, that everything that Shlomo HaMelech did was mamish done al pi nevuah. We're not allowed to add anything. So you're adding to the ramp. Not Shabbos related. And here you can't say Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash. Even if Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash, you can't add anything in the Beis HaMikdash. And the only answer will be V'idolei Mevatlei. So it must be that you're not being Mevatel the salt. And as the Rishonim point out, because they needed to work the hides in the Beis HaMikdash, they would make it into leather. And for that, you also need salt. And they would use this salt. So they wouldn't abandon it there. If they would need the salt, they would take it later. But now we have a new issue. If you don't plan to abandon it and it doesn't become halachically part of the ramp, part of the floor, now you got yourself a bona fide chatzitza. And again, we learned this in Zvachim so clearly that a kohen has to be standing on the floor of the azara. He has to be standing on the floor of the kevish. Gewaldig. Gemara says, no, don't compare our sugya to what we learned in Zvachim. The azara, when the kohen is doing the avodah, right, shchita, kabbalah, heilacha, zrika, he has to be standing on the floor of the azar. He's doing an avodah. Here, we're putting it on the ramp. This is only heilachas evadim lakevesh. And the Gemara begins with the havamina that's not called an avodah. Asks the Gemara, Belelli, taking off the evadim on the ramp is not an avodah v'aksiv. In the beginning of Vayikra, v'hikriv ha'koynes ha'koyel, v'hiktir ha'mizbecha, v'amar marzu ha'ilachas evarim la'kevesh. That this is also considered a priestly service. And if that's the case, chatzitza. Ela ema, indeed, when they brought the evarim on the mizbech, there was no salt. It would take and make a chatzitza. They only put the salt there, b'hilachas eitzim lamaracham, the lava vaydehi. And since it's not being abandoned there, right? So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that bringing up the wood to put it on the pyre, that is not called an avodah. And therefore, we don't mind if he's walking on salt.
So what would they do after the salt was spread? They would wash it off or something like that? And then, but the whole point of the salt was they were afraid they were going to slip. So they said they were only worried that they were going to slip when they were carrying wood, but not when they were carrying.
So ask a New Yorker, once you put salt on the roads, and it does its job and it gets rid of the snow, then you can take the salt off as well. You can wash that off as well. Worked. It was effective enough. Especially we learned this together in Talmud. They used to bring up the woods early in the morning. That was one of the first things that they did. It's like in the beginning of the day, you put the salt out, and once Kahanim are going up and down, then you clean off the altar. You clean off the ramp. As we learned before, maybe Tevin, you can bring, Rabbi says, you can bring straw. You can spread it out, again, based on what we learned, because since you don't plan to abandon it there, there's no problem with binyan. Hold on, your statement was too vague. We learned in Abraisa another detail. I know after learning Shabbos and ERUVIN, one of the least defined problems is uvda d'choil. When do you say uvda d'choil? When don't you say uvda d'choil? But he quotes a baraisa uvda d'choil that kishuh merada, if you go ahead and spread out the straw, ein merada, you don't do it the way you do it during the week, which is you're holding a basket and you're with your hands taking it out and putting it on the ground, or you have it in a box. You don't take it out of a sal normally. You don't take it out the regular way from a kupa. Ella b'shulei kupa. Machlekes, we'll learn shulei kupa means you have to turn the basket upside down. You have to get it out of the basket to the ground in an unusual way because it's uvda d'choil. And you never made that statement. And Rava right away agreed. Taka, what he said was not clear enough. He did not say that you have to do it with the shinoi. And to make sure that no one makes a mistake is Chader Oikim Rava Hamoida. Allah, he got his interpreter. And the Darash, and he expounded. And he said that Dvarim Shamarti Lefnechem, what I said before, Tos, Hein Biyadi, I made a mistake. And Baram Kach Amru Mishum Rabbi Elazar, we have on the side over here. Kishu Merada, Ein Merada, Lebesal, Lebekupa, Ella Beshule HaKupa. Okay. Now the next thing in the Mishnah was about using this windlass to get water by Migdosh Yeh Medina Loi. The Malin Mi Boyd Hagoyla. And again, the Ula understands that the reason why you may not use a windlass is because it makes noise. Guys, if you remember, we learned this in Talmud. I had over there the Ben Cotton made a muchni lakir. A muchni is also this galgal. Because they didn't want to have lina. If you remember the details in Talmud, they would actually put down the kiyar in one of the wells that are in the water. So like this, the water is not exposed overnight in the Beis Hamikdash. And if you remember, oh, very good, that's a good picture of a galgal. And what we learned in Talmud is that the noise that was made when they would bring the kiyar back up was heard by everyone. And they knew exactly what place, where they're up to in the Avodas Hayom. Point is, Ula understood that the potential, the theoretical problem is mashmi akoil, which is included in the Gezerah that Rabbanan not to play musical instruments, and because of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, so you are allowed to use the galgal in the Mikdash. That's the way Ula understood it. And we begin with the story. Ula once went to the house of Rabbi Nasha, and also Gavra came a person, Taraf Abava, and a person began to knock on the door to get in. And Ula was so upset about that. You're knocking on the door on Shabbos, mashmi akoil. Omar, man, hi, who is this guy? Litach al gufei, may his body become chulin. You know why? Because he's machal Shabbos. You're not allowed to produce any sound. So Rabba tells Ula, I know there's a girsa here, that's Rabba, we're going to go with Rabba Ula. So Omar lay Rabba, no, there's nothing wrong knocking on a door on Shabbos. It's making sound, it's not musical sound. Omar lay Rabba lo yasru ela kol shel shiur. And not knocking on a door. Now, parenthetically, we have even in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to use a door knocker to knock on the door. But we'll mention that a little bit later. But that wasn't the keli miyuchet to making sound, which is what we are machman not to use. You knocked on the door even with his hand. Ula held asur, mashmi akor, Rabba held mutter. Now we're going to have 4 questions trying to prove against the Rabba that the Isur de Rabbanan is even if it's non-musically related, and Rabba will answer each one of the questions. Let's go. This is non-related to this. The yoife is a siphon. You know, when you have 2 barrels and you want to get the liquid out of one into the other, so they would attach then 2 reeds. That's the diyoy P. Diyoy is 2 mouths. And you would put the opening of one mouth in one barrel, the opening of the other mouth in the other barrel, and you would suction out some of the liquid. And once the liquid begins to flow, it keeps flowing until you stop it. So the Braisa says that you are allowed to do that. And number 2, that's guys, when you hear the word arak, so many Moroccans are learning, they have in mind the Moroccan arak. We're going to learn now the Talmudic arak. Arak was a utensil that had a very small opening in the top, had many holes in the bottom. You would fill it up with liquid, and being that the opening in the top was so little, when it was closed, no liquid went out from the bottom, even though all of the little holes in the bottom were opened. You would put a metal keli underneath it. If you would want to make this interesting sound, you would then unplug the top little opening, and water would drip out onto this metal pan. It was used for some people to wake them up. It was used for some people to put them to sleep, right? White noise. That's a arak. So it says in the Braisa that umatifen may arak, that you are allowed to use this arak for a choyle on Shabbos. And what's the issue of using an arak? The issue would be is that when the water drips onto the pan, it makes noise. So that's the kasha l'choyle in l'bani loy. And hechidami, are we not speaking about the nim that someone is sleeping and they use the arak as an alarm clock? The kaboya lita'ar, and when waking people up, for that you don't need a musical sound, any noise. And here we're seeing that only l'choyle can you make a sound. Is the charai that normally even non-musical sounds may not be made on Shabbos. Shmamina that aludei kali, any type of sound production is asur. So the Gemara answers for Rabbi, no, that the arak was used for someone who's awake. And the kaboya dilinam, and you want to put a person to sleep. Putting a person to sleep, here you have to have gentle musical sounds. And the reason why they had this arak was the mishtama ki kolat this zamzume. It made a sound like bells because it dripped. There was a rhythm to it. That's already called musical sounds. Musical sounds are certainly asur midrabanan. You need a heter. In our case, the heter was to a choyle. Weiter. Another kasha now, but says in Abraisa, Hamashamin perois v'pnei ha'oifos, a person is guarding his fruits from birds, or udalav, or his gourds, his pumpkins, from animals. Mishamed kedarke b'Shabbos, he can stand guard as he does in the week, even on Shabbos. Ubulvad, but what he may not do is make the sounds, which is shelo yisapek, don't clap your hands, v'lo yitapach, don't beat your chest, v'lo yirake, don't stamp your feet. Kederech shehein oisin b'choil. Now, these sounds to chase away animals were not musical sounds. There was time you're making noise. Now, my tama, is it not lav the komoilut kala? And we see again from over here that the chol oilude kala, even if it's non-musical music, is asur midrabanan. So Amar Rabbi Yaakov, no. That when it comes to a guard, the reason why he might made because we want to remind him, oh, today is Shabbos. Now in the week, you know what he would do? He would take a pebble and throw it on the animals. A pebble is muktzah. So in order to remind him, they went beyond. But weiter, stam making non-musical sounds on Shabbos was never prohibited. The Elyahu the Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Next attempted question on Abba. Noshim. Women who play with nuts, women playing with nuts, it's like bowling. They would have nuts on the ground, and then they would, you would take a nut over here and you would roll it, and you would have to knock on the nuts over there. So he says that women who play with nuts, they may not do so on Shabbos. And what would be the issue of bowling with nuts on Shabbos? Is it not that when one nut hits the other nut, it makes noise? It might have alav the kamoilid kala, and again from here you see v'choliludi kala asur. So the Gemara says loy dilma asi lashvui gumais is because in order to prepare the terrain for playing this type of bowling with nuts, you have to make sure that the ground upon which or the ramp upon which is straight, and you might flatten out. And if you do that, then you're chayiv in boinem, or if it's outside of chodesh v'chulei. If you think it's related to sound, and I don't understand. The Amar of Yehuda that noshim misachkois betapuchim, that women who use apples to do this type of bowling game, that's also us. And now when one apple hits the other, it doesn't make sound. Hassan mayoilude kala ika. Elo dilma asila shvua gumais. So Zacharaya, that this issue has nothing to do with mashmiya koil. Weiter. Rabbi is standing. Next, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. Guys, our Mishnah, that's the relationship of the whole sugya. Memalin, you are allowed to fill up water, mi boyd hagoyla, from the bird that they call the goyla bird in the Azara. Umi boyd hagodol, with a galgal on Shabbos. So what, in other words, b'migdashin, b'midim eloi. And again, my tam alav mishum, the oilude kala v'aser, like we quoted over there from Talmud, that the muchni of Ben Katan, made a lot of noise. It makes noise. So the Gemara says no. Again, Rabbi says no. It has nothing to do with noise making. The problem is Gzeira Shema Yemale Liginasi Luchurvasi. The last line of Rashi says Rashi that mitoich shemamalim boy beloy toirach, using this galgal really made our access to water very easy, like we all have today. And if a person will have so much water with so much ease, they might forget and they might water that which they planted in their garden, that which they planted in their churva. Ooh, that's already zoireya. So to prevent you from doing it, you can't even get water with that type of ease. That's an isur d'Rabbanan. Oh, ain't shvus b'mikdash. Has nothing to do with making sounds. And on top of that, this is going to side now with Rabbi Ameimar Shara lemimle b'gilgala b'mechayza. He allowed people to use this type of galgal to draw water in mechayza. Is the charaya that Rabbi? It's a proof against Ula. It was if Ameimar would have held like Ula that the reason why you can't use a galgal is because it makes noise. Who cares where you're at? But since he also understood the only reason is like Rabba, which is what? You might come to water your plants. So if you live in a city, right, we don't have plants, we don't have gardens. So he felt there's no reason to be chayshish, and he allowed them to use it. And he said,
Rabbi, sorry,
yes.
just a quick question. Putting the goggle aside over here, you can make that gzeira to any. You could make that gzeira to pasibirois when they're taking water out of the wells. I mean, you can take any water.
So by the pasibirois tzvika, they were allowed to use a rope to draw the water up. At least the bringing the water up, you schwitzed. So therefore,
I'm saying, but if the whole idea is that we're scared that they're gonna water the plants, and you could say that about any bear.
No, tzvika pasibirois. If you're not going to allow people drawing out of the well, but they're going to die of thirst. I'm saying people have to have access to water. They wanted the access to water to be a bit more difficult.
Okay, so not pasibirois. I'm saying any well. If the whole idea is
by any well that here we're learning that you can't use a galgal. Drew up the water the hard way. We're learning new things. Okay, 1 second. And Amar, because he said, Ameimar says, my tama gazru rabbanan, it's only shema yamal linasi lechavasi. Now, one thing is clear. If Chazal would have made a proper gezeda by gathering the Sanhedrin and they would have taken account, then once they make a gezeda, then it applies everywhere. Clearly, it didn't apply everywhere. It wasn't that type of gezeda. It was like an eitz toiva. Be careful. So Ameimar says, here, I don't have to be careful. In our city, Ameimar felt in Mechayza, no one had ginas, no one planted stuff. So the prohibition doesn't apply. That is what he said initially. All that already is araya teraba. However, even the Kachaz, once he saw turning to Kuf Dalad on the base, become Tarubal Kisana, when people used waters for industrialist purposes, they would have flax. Flax has to be soaked in water. Right, we also learned that in Shabbos about putting flax in water before Shabbos. When he saw that people are using it, putting flax, soaking the flax. You remember from Shabbos, it can be lisha, it can even be zoireya, whatever the issue goes into. So he says asur luhu, he also asert. But all that is just a raya that Ameimar understood pshat in the Mishnah, as did Rabbi. I want to turn back quickly to the Kuf Dalad Amad. Let's look inside the second to last Tosfos. It's a very important Tosfos. Because here we have a machlokes between the Rabbeinu Hananel and the Riv. Halacha l'maisa, what type of sounds may we not make on Shabbos? So the Rabbeinu Hananel, I'm reading towards the end of Tosfos. The Rabbeinu Hananel writes, the halacha is like Ula. Why is the halacha like Ula? Because there were 4 attempted questions against Rabbi. So he says, Rabbeinu Hananel says, that even though Rabbi managed, afagav, that the Shani Rabbi kolhani tiyufta, the Akshila, he faremferd all the kashas. But when you see in the Gemara, when you learn that someone makes a statement and there's many questions against him, that he's refuted. And we don't rely on all of his terutzim. We view him refuted, halachically. However, he quotes the Riv, the Rab Alphys and Rabbi Yehuda bar Barzilai, he paskins like Rabbi, including the reason because it's Ameimar and Rabbi. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like Rabba and like Ameimar. Making any sounds that are not musically related is permitted. Making any musical sounds is prohibited. But as we'll speak out, this comes up a few times throughout Shas. Originally, that also included clapping your hands. It also included dancing to music. That was Asr Midrabanan. However, the Tosfos writes something unusual that Amar sides with Tosfos. That since the reason is that you might fix the musical instrument, and already in the times of Tosfos, the commoner did not know how to fix a musical instrument. So it's so far enough. Playing a musical instrument may not be done. But for you to bang on the table or to clap your hands or to dance, that's something that Tosfos permits because the kam doesn't exist anymore. And that's the big exception. Like we just mentioned, if you have a gezerah, even if the tam is bottled, the gezerah stands, and we follow the Ramah, right? As we know, the Rebbe and the Fabrengens. Now, some people are machmir, when they clap their hands, they make a shinui. They make a shinui because of this gezerah. And L'kula Alma, in the times of the Mishnah, clapping your hands to music was asur midrabanan on Shabbos. But again, the Ramah, who paskins like Tosfos L'kula, was a psak din that the Rebbe upheld in public. For those who remember that when Rabbi Chadikov at Tzaddik, when he would clap his hands and he would make a shinoi, the Rebbe would look at him on Shabbos and the Rebbe would clap his hands regularly. And it only worked for that Fabrengen, because the next week Rabbi Chadikov went back to do what he always did, and the Rebbe again would show him that we can clap their hands as one does regularly on Shabbos based on the kula of Tosfos, which is also brought down in the Ramah. Let's go weiter, it's getting late. Now the top line on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. The Mishnah gave one more exception, that there was a well called Hakir, and that well could be used, you can draw water even with a galgal on Yom Tov. So first of all, my be'er Hakir, Amar Shmuel, the word Hakir means boyd, shehikru aleha dvarim v'hitiruah. That there was one time, that many Yidden were around this well, and they had a lot of arguments. They wanted to draw up the water on Shabbos using a galgal. And people said, you can't do that. But there were chachamim then, this happened before the building of the second Beis HaMikdash. There were great chachamim there, and they argued that we're going to do it, where no one is going to, like you said, Svika, no one is going to water their plants here. They needed to get the water for them to drink, and they were matir using that well, but that story happened on Yom Tov. So when they gave a heter, it wasn't applied universally. It only applied on that well and only on Yom Tov. But here we're teaching Hakir means a specific well that on it many arguments were said. No, the word Hakir is not a name of a specific well. We see in Abraisa, not all the boiros Hakiros were Chazal lenient in, only this one. Now hold on, if the word Hakir is the name of this well, then the words of the Braisa doesn't make sense. So there's only one, Maizu Bolvad. So we're not changing the halacha, we're just teaching the word Hakir differently. The word Hakir is a name given to any well that has in it natural spring waters, unlike other water pits that you have to put the water in it. Hakir means as it says, that's just a verse that shows that the word Hakir refers to a natural well. And this well, again, only this well remains permitted on Yom Tov. Why is that? Because when the Yidden were coming up to Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning of the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, Chanu Aliyah, it's mamash what Tzvika said, and you had a lot of Yidden, they needed to supply a lot of water. So aside of first of all, it was Yom Tov. Yom Tov you can carry, so they didn't have to make the pasi birois beforehand. But people says, no, you have to do it the hard way. So they said, no, you're kidding? We need to get a lot of water. But there's a takanas chazal. If it's going to be so easy to get water, you're going to use the water maybe to throw it on to water your garden. So they argued that we got to make a heter. And when you have a gathering of enough chachamim that are in number and in chachma greater than the one before, they have the koach to be mated it. Now, when we say neviim, a navi cannot go against halacha. So the Gemara clarifies, it doesn't mean, by the way, there were neviim, but it wasn't, they were mated it because of their nevuah. V'loy neviim shebeneim, or not the neviim heim hitiru. It wasn't they who did it. Ela minag avoisam biyadehem. Very interesting use of this word. Like Rashi says, minag avoisam biyadem here means is that they paskined that in this case, in this well, it was on Yom Tov. We are allowed to use a galgal. And once they were mated it, the Mishnah says it didn't remain a one-time thing. Now it's a minhag avoisam b'yodayim that we can be lenient when it comes to that well. You have to know where that well is. They were mated it on a Yom Tov, so you can only take the water with a galgal out of Yom Tov. Okay, this gezerah, thank God, did not spill over to modern plumbing. Did not spill. You can't take water with a galgal. But you're allowed to open up your faucet on Shabbos. Also, because if not, how would you get water? That's the way we get water. Okay, Chavre, let's learn the next Mishnah, and then we will leave the Gemara until the end for the next year. Says the Holy Mishnah. Guys, we're learning the last Mishnah in ERUVIN. Migdash Medina. Mikdash Medina, like we spoke on in our intro, that you have a sheretz. If a sheretz from the Shemona Sheratzim dies, it's mitame. Taking out the sheretz is a challenge because if you're going to grab the sheretz, you'll become tummy. Now, this is not Shabbos related. I know that, but there's going to be a detail of the Mishnah which is Shabbos related, and that will be what happens if you find the dead sheretz on Shabbos. But before we come to Shabbos, the Mishnah begins with the week. That sheretz shenim mikdash. So the Tanach here, which is Rabbi Yochanan and Broika, says that the Kohen should use his gartel. Why? First of all, to grab it, the Kohen will become tummy. If you grab it with your gartel, the gartel becomes tummy. The sheretz is an av, the gartel becomes a rishon. A rishon is not metama adam as a sheni. There is tuma shemi and adam midrabanan, not over here. And why do you not try to find the keli that the keli itself will not become tamei? Because it's going to take you longer to find the keli. The gartel is something that the kohen already has. Shaloi lishois esatuma, not to prolong tuma in the holy mikdash. These are the words of Rabbi Yochanan and Broika. Rabbi Yehuda argues and he says, no, don't use the gartel. Go find bitseves shel eitz. Any flat woodenware, pshute klietz, is not mekabel tuma, even though it's a keli. So find tongues that are too flat, that's like a scissors made out of wood. Grab the sheretz with that sevis. The advantage will be shaloi lerabois esatuma. You won't increase items in the mikdash that are tummy. The downside is it's going to remain there for a longer amount of time. So that's the machlokes, as we'll explain in the next year, how the Rebbe explains the underpinning machlokes between them. It's kamas versus echos. We'll leave that for the next class. Now we go to Shabbos. If it's found on Shabbos, from where can you take it out? Why does Shabbos change this din? Manogeya, I'll tell you why. Because sheretz is also muktzah. Ain't shvus b'mikdash. I get that. But the question is, are we going to suspend muktzah in the entire mikdash or only in the holier parts of the mikdash? So here again, we have a machlokes Tanakama, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva. So the Tanakama says over here, Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, that you can take it out of the heichel proper, God forbid if there's a dead sheretz there, or from the antechamber, or even from the area in the Azara, but only the holiest part of the Azara, which is between the antechamber, the first white line, and the Mizbeach. These are the words of Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. If it's found in the Azara, east of the Mizbeach, then we'll see soon. Don't take it out. Muktzeh. However, Rabbi Kiva says, no, kol mokim, any place in the Azara, any place that if one enters betuma, Yechayev Kares or Chatos, Misham Mitzian Oisei, which includes the rest of the Azara, all the way Ezras Yisrael. Now, V'shar Kol HaMakoymes, the temple compound was larger, according to both. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, there were those areas beyond the Ezras Yisrael that if you would enter Betuma, you would not be Chayev Kares. So what do you do on Shabbos? Not to move Muktzah, Koifen, all of Psachtar, take this copper pot, turn it upside down over it. People should not touch it, but you can only remove it after Shabbos. Now comes the final statement of the Massechta in Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Now it's very vague because we have no idea what he's referring to. And as the Gemara is going to point out at the end of the Massechta, he's referring to two different dinim that were said in two different places, one of which is on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, if a person is trying to make it back to the city before Shabbos, but he has to enter the Tchum when it gets dark, but he finds himself still outside of the Tchum. So we learned on Nun Beis Amud Beis, even if you even one amma outside the Tchum, that's it, you may not enter. You're stuck there for Shabbos. Rab Shimon says no, that you have a 15 amma leeway. And Rab Shimon now is explaining why he's lenient. That Rab Shimon, that place where the Chachamim were lenient, you came already within 15 ammas. It's considered as if you entered the Tchum. It wasn't the kula that they gave you. They really gave you what was already yours. As Rab Shimon says, that the people, they're surveyors that would mark the Tchum and they would place in the ground a marker, At Kam Tchum Shamis, they were Mahmed, they placed it around 15 Amas before the real Tchum. So when you come within 15 Amas, you are Be'emes already in the Tchum. That's not called a Kula, they're revealing to you what's already yours. And now another statement of Rab Shimon, and the Gemara is going to say, this is going to what we learned on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis, and that is that if a musical instrument of a Levi snapped on Shabbos, you are even allowed to make, Rab Shimon has, Tanakama says, Chachamim say, tie it, shira, Kshidas asan midoiraisa, yeah. But since avoid is doicha Shabbos, playing the music is doicha Shabbos, machshirei mitzvahs doicha Shabbos. Rab Shimon was machmer. Rab Shimon says you can only make a bow. That Bechlal, when Chachamim were lenient in the Migdash, generally that's not to override a doiraisa, that's only to override a derabanan. Making an anivas asur miderabanan, that you may do in the Migdash, but making a kasher, Rab Shimon holds you may not. Chavra Atkan, the Mishnah, God willing, in the final shiur, we will begin from the Gemara with the help of Hashem. All right, let's go. It's a little bit late, but we can do it. Let's go flying. With the help of Hashem, we are making a siyum on the Massechta ERUVIN, learning the final daf. We left off on daf Kuf Dalid Amid Beis, right after the Mishnah. We're going to be learning a little bit about the prohibition of bringing a sheretz into the Mikdash, because the topic of the Mishnah was about removing a sheretz. We're going to have a huge chiddush of Shmuel that holds that there is no isur midoiraisa to bring a sheretz into the Mikdash. Wow. We're going to learn some dinei tumah v'tara. We're going to learn the klal that any earthenware utensil will never become an av hatuma. And finally, we will explain, we're going to learn a brais on daf kufei, that if repairs have to be made in the Mikdash, so there is a seder of priorities. Who should be ideally the one to go to make the repair? And only if this one is not available, do you then go to the other one. So there's a seder of priorities. And we're going to have at the end the Gemara's explanation of the meanings of the words of Rab Shimon that we learned in the previous shiur. Rab Shimon ends the whole Massechta in Mishnayos. Rab Shimon made like this dual statement. It was very vague. And we're going to explain exactly what is Rab Shimon referring to. So let's start with the Gemara on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. Okay, so the Mishnah spoke about the importance of removing a sheretz from the Beis HaMikdash. Now, is one allowed to bring a sheretz into the Beis HaMikdash? You'll say, of course not. Yeah, what's the source for that? And the Gemara begins with a huge chiddush. Amar Avtabi, Bar Kisna, in the name of Shmuel, Chavra, listen to these words. Hamachnitz temei sheretz lamikdash. If something became tamei from a sheretz, Rashi says a keli. Sheretz is an av. So a keli, something that had halachic contact with sheretz, is a rishon. If you bring that into the Beis HaMikdash, you're chayiv. It's asur midoiraisa. However, says Shmuel, ironically, the sheretz itself, we're not advocating for you to do it, God forbid. But if someone brings a sheretz into the Beis HaMikdash, they did not violate any de'oraisas. You're going to have to remove it. Imagine, something that becomes tamei from the sheretz is not allowed to be brought into the temple, midoiraisa. And as she quotes a pasuk in Chukas, where it says, Ki Mikdash Hashem Timei. And by the way, that pasuk ends, V'nichras ha'nefesh hahi. According to this version, chayiv means you're chayiv kares, or chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. There's a lot of talk about what punishment you'll get, but it's definitely asur midoiraisa. The sheretz itself is not. Wow. Now, my tama, where did Shmuel get that from? So it's gavaldik. Shmuel quotes a pasuk in Nasai. The pasuk in Nasai says, Mizachar va'ad nekeva tishalechu. That pasuk, el michutz lamachne tishalchum. That pasuk is speaking about that if something tamei is in the Mikdash, you got to send it out. So first of all, we have a kal v'chomer. If something that's tamei has to be taken out, so kal v'chomer, you may not bring it in. And that's the source that you may not bring in tuma into the Beis HaMikdash. However, says Shmuel, since the Torah specifies Zachac and Nekeva, so where do we apply this isur? Mi sheyesh lo tahara b'mikvah, like a human being, like a Zachac and a Nekeva, which will also include a keli that became, not a kli cheres, a metal keli. Any other keli, not an earthenware keli, that could be taken into the mikvah. That is something that God is referring to. Send it out. From that, we understand that God, for sure, does not allow us to bring it in. Yatsa sheretz, wow. Since a sheretz ain't loitara, so this pasuk is not referring to a sheretz. Don't bring it in, but there is no doiraisa dika prohibition. It's a huge statement. Now the Gemara says, well, Shmuel said that. What about Tanoim? So maybe at least Misayele, we have a raya to Shmuel from the following brayso. It says in the brayso, same logic. It begins based on the same premise. When it says in Parshas Nasai, Mizachar va'ad nekeva tishalechu, why did God specify Zachar and Nekeva? So Rabbi Yosef says that comes to exclude that a klei cheres, biblically, like a sheretz, doesn't have to be taken out. biblically, and therefore there's no isur midah oiraisa to bring it in. How is a klei cheres different than a zachar and a keva? L'chayda, the same logic of Shmuel. My tama lav mishum, because the leis leitahar of a mikvah, which is why Rabbi Yossi Haglili excludes the klei cheres. That should also exclude a sheretz. So the Gemara says, no. I'll tell you, no. I'll tell you the reason for Rabbi Yossi Haglili is mi shenasa avatuma yatzek klei cheres she'enasa avatuma. Zachar and a keva, people could become an av. How do we become an av? So many ways. First of all, if we have contact with a mace is a tuma, then there are many tumas that are yotzin migufay. Now, what about other items? What could become an av? Let's speak about a keli. How would a keli become an av? Two ways. Either if it's midras of those who are metame b'tumas midras, but tumas midras is only applicable to items that were meant to be sat upon or meant to be laid upon. The normal klei cheres of the times of Chazal was very flimsy. People did not sit on it. So since it wasn't made to be midrast upon, even if a zav or a zava did sit on it, it will not become tami b'tumas midras, which is an av. Another thing, Rashi brings the source that a klei cheres does not become tame as an av, even though it was under the oil of a mace, or if it had contact with a mace. Tumas mace is not metame a klei cheres, as Rashi explains why. So only that is excluded. A sheretz itself is an av. According to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, he wouldn't necessarily agree with the Shmuel. So again, we're trying to find a Tana to back up such a radical statement that midah raisa, there's no isur of bringing a sheretz into the Mikdash. So now, lema, perhaps, ketanoi. We learned in Abraisa, our Mishnah, that's our Mishnah sheretz, shenim sebe Mikdash, even during the week. So the first Tana, Rabbi Yechanan Memreika says, Kohen moitzir behem yonoi. Why is that? You're making the gartel tamei as a rishoin. What? At least lishoy says atuma. You don't want to prolong it there. Every coin has a gartel. There's a whole topic whether the gartel of the coin had shatness in it. And according to that shita, he was not wearing it. He only wore it during the avodah. So therefore, we cared the least about the gartel. Whatever the logic is, you take the gartel, you take it out because that's what's available, and therefore you will not prolong it. These are the words of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, wait until go look for this wooden keli, this wooden tongues. Because when you take it out with the tongues, because of the rule that pshutek le'etz einan mekablan tuma, shaloi l'rabbi says atuma. Now, what's underlying their argument? Suggesting Gemara my lab hakam ifligi. The man the Amar shaloi lishois. He holds kosavar hamachnitz sheretz lamigdash is asur midai raisa your chayiv. So therefore, we want to get it out ASAP. It's a biblical violation. Umando amar shalei l'rabbis, and therefore wait. He'll hold that hamachnitz sheretz lamigdash is pater. So we don't care if it takes another couple of minutes for you to find the tongues. But chlal there's no isur dai raisa. Beautiful. So the Gemara says not necessarily so. I will argue everyone holds that you're chayiv. Everyone obviously is not Shmuel, like Tosfos points out. Shmuel will hold that this is the machlokes Tanoim, and then Shmuel will paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. We're looking for a Tana at the base of Shmuel. The Gemara is not liking Shmuel. We are going to say not like Shmuel. It's not the machlokes Tanoim. Everyone holds your chayiv. Here it's a lose-lose. Something negative is going to happen. So you have to pick that which is the least problematic. So he holds that prolonging tuma is a greater problem. So therefore, take it out with your gartel. Umar savar afushay tumay adif. Spreading of the tuma is a bigger problem. So allow it to stay there longer, but chop your wooden tongues. And the Rebbe, this is important, explains that the meaning behind this machlokes is kamus versus echus, in the positive and in the negative. Here it's in the negative. Prolonging tuma for the sheretz to stay longer, that's a kamus dike issue, because the tuma is already there. You're not adding to it. You're not making another thing tummy. But the tuma itself is staying longer. That's a kamus dike problem. Taking it out by using your gartel, you're making something else tummy. That's an echus dike issue. So if you have to pick which one is a greater problem, if you hold that kamus is worse than echos, which is the shita of Rabbi Yechanan Memreika, then take it out with your gartel. You're adding tuma, you're not prolonging it. And the same thing in the other sheet. And this is also negeya to the statement of Rab Shimon, as God willing, they'll have enough time to explain. So based on that, again, we're trying to find the source of a machlokes tanoim that Shmuel, that everyone will be moide. Shmuel can say, I rely on that Tana. Elo kahani tanoi, guys, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amud. Ditnan mehechan moitzion oisai. The second part of the Mishnah, when it's on Shabbos, now you have an additional muktzah issue. So again, there's a machlokes. Can you take it out from anywhere in the Mikdash, which is Rabbi Akiva, or is it limited only in the holier parts? Rab Shimon ben Anas and my lav the same thing. The man the Amud from the entire Azara, that Azara loy, Rab Shimon ben Anas. You know why? Because since he holds that even bringing in a sheretz is not a biblical violation, and really, why are you getting it out? Why are you taking it out? So Rashi writes, Mishum kavod shechina. It's not a good thing. But it's only when you are closer to the Shechina. Uman the Amar Rabbi Akiva, who holds Mikol Azara, he'll hold, not like Shmuel, that you're chayiv. So again, l'chayda, that's the machlokes Tanoi, Daf Kuf Hey, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, the same thing. Everyone holds, not like Shmuel, that it's asur midoy raisa to bring a sheretz into the Mikdash. However, the reason why they are arguing, when it says in Divrei Hayamim, they're speaking about that which Chizkiah did after his father Achaz died, who was a Rasha, who brought Avodah Zarah not only in Eretz Yisrael, but also in the Beis HaMikdash. And he needed to clear out the Beis HaMikdash from the Tumah, from Tumas Avodah Zarah. And it says, Vayevayu Arkayanim, Lepnima Beis Hashem Letaher. And what did they do? Vayoitziu es kol hatuma, Asher Matzu Behechal Hashem. First, they brought it out from the Hechal into the Chatzer Beis Hashem. But once they brought it out to the Chatzer, from then, they didn't bring it all the way out. Vayekablu halavim lohoitzi lanachal kidron chutza. So why didn't the Kahana bring it all the way out? So Mar Savar, this is Rab Shimon ben Anas, midi ishtane ba'azara ba'lavim. The fact that Kahanim only took it out of the Heichel, but once it was in the Azara, but once it was outside the Heichel, they accomplished their mission. So now, why would a Kohen do it? Then you give it to a Levi. Because Tuma ba'azara leke. Wow. Now, Tuma ba'azara leke doesn't mean mamish Tuma ba'azara leke. It means we're not that machmer. You see, b'negeya Tuma, we prioritize the holier parts of the Beis HaMikdash versus the lesser holy parts. However, Omar Savar, that's Rabbi Akiva, no. That ad heicha deloi efsher b'levia mafka kahanim, heicha de efsher b'levia msulei metama kahanim. But really, as far as removing Tumah is concerned, the whole complex is the same. You got to get rid of it. And therefore, when there is a sheretz b'mikdash, very good. And the issue is now chevra muktzah, and we're looking to suspend muktzah because ein shvus b'mikdash, goes to everywhere in the mikdash. Okay. So bottom line is we did not find in a definite way a Tana that will be like Shmuel. Shmuel, obviously, like we spoke out to Tosfos, holds that he understands the machlokes in our Mishnah, that it is a machlokes Tanoim, the first part of the Mishnah, and he passes like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, when we're speaking about getting Tumah out of the Beis HaMikdash, when we speak about also repairing the Beis HaMikdash, so something that normally may not be done needs to be done, right? Entering the temple. Who should be the one entering to repair? So Tana Rabbanan, Hakoil Nechnasna Behechal Livnois. If there's a need to build, everyone can enter. Or everyone can enter Lasakin to repair. Everyone can enter Lohoitzi Tumah. Everyone doesn't mean that everyone should jump. There is a seder of priorities. If you have 2 people in front of you, do the least violation. So Kohanim anyways can enter. So if a Kohen is available, since he's allowed to enter to do the avodah, let him do the repairs. Or mitzvah by Kohanim. If there's no Kohanim, then you go 1 notch down. Then go by Leviim. Ein sham Leviim, nechnasim Yisraelim. End of Braisa. Now, what the Braisa did not mention at all was what happens if you have people that are tamei. What happens if you have a Kohen that's tamei and a Yisrael that's tahar? The Braisa didn't say that tahara trumps kahuna. The Braisa only mentioned Kahanim Leviim Yisraelim, which implies idi tohoiden in to meim loy. The fact that the Braisa did not mention even Betuma means that when does a Kohen go before a Levi, before a Yisrael, if everyone is tahar? But if there's a Tumah, if one of them is tamei, we are learning from this Braisa that a Yisrael that's tahar is before he takes priority over a Kohen that's tamei. Someone has to enter the Mikdash. Let the Yisrael who started enter. However, Amar Afuna, I want you to know, Azoi, that's the way you are inferring from this Tanah Rabbanan. But Rav Kahana, Rabbeinu Hananel adds the words, who himself was a Kohen, and therefore Misayeya Kahani, he was out to help Kohanim. And he learned another Braisa that says that a Kohen that's Tameh is still better than a Yisrael that's Tor. The Tani Rav Kahana, according to Braisa, when it says in Parshas Emoy, Ach ela paroiches lo yavai. There the pasuk is speaking about a Kohen who is a Balmum. A Balmum may not do the Avodah. He may not enter to do the Avodah. So says the Braisa, Yochel lo yu kahana Balmumim nechlasim bein ulam and Mizbeach. They should also not be allowed to go to the area between the antechamber and the Mizbeach. Lasois rikuye pachim. Rikuye pachim were beaten out. Beautiful golden panels that were made to be put inside on the walls of the Kodesh Kodshim. So they're not allowed to do the Avodah, but perhaps they may not even do those works they used to bang out these golden sheets in between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So Talmud Leimed in Pasuk it says Ach. Ach means Chalak. We are qualifying it, which means that only the Avodah is something that a Balmum Kohen may not do. But if he's going in the temple complex in order to make a repair, a Kohen who's a Balmum is allowed to do it. And furthermore, now when we're speaking B'chlal about again the order of priorities, mitzvah b'tamimim. If you can pick to do repairs, first get a coin that doesn't have a blemish. Ein sham tamimim nechnasim balmumim. Same thing says the Braisa, the first white line, mitzvah b'tahoiden. Ein sham tahoiden nechnasim tameim. So clearly you see, says the either kahanim in Yisraelim loy. Here this Braisa says clearly that a kohen tummy, get a kohen tar. But if there's a kohen tummy, let it be a kohen tummy. We don't mention Yisraelim because we would rather a kohen who's tummy over a Yisrael, even that's tar, and that's in argument with what we inferred from the first Tanah Rabbanan. Now the Gemara asks, the second line, Ibaylahu, they asked in the yeshiva, what happens if you have a kohen that's tummy? You have another kohen who's a balmum. Which one takes precedent over the other? Which one is lesser problematic? Eizamehem nichnas, to make repairs or to remove tumah. So machlekes. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi Yomarav says nichnas, tamei nichnas. Tamei is better. Why is that? Whenever we are doing a carbon sibur, if most people are tamei, or if most kohanim are tamei, then avoida at those times could be done b'tumah. Never can a balmum do the avodah. Never. So therefore, you see, tumah is a lesser problem. However, Rabbi Elazar says no, balmum nichnas, because there's another leniency that we see regarding a blemished kohen. Eating kachim lechatchila can be done by a balmum. A tamei kohen may not eat kachim. So therefore, again, we are looking for that which is the least problematic. Thank you very much. It was speaking about a blemish on the body, as the Torah enumerates in Parshas Emoid. All right. So now, going into the final stretch, Rabbi Shimon Oimer v'chulei. Rabbi Shimon, who Rabbeinu HaKadosh quotes two statements that he made at the end of the Massechta Mishnah, is going back to what we learned in Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis, says statements that we have no understanding what he's referring to. He's certainly not referring to the final Mishnah, which, by the way, that in itself is a problem. So why did Rabbeinu HaKadosh put it in the final Mishnah? And as we'll speak out at Rebbe Siyum in Chelik Yud Aleph B'Shalach Gimel, beautifully why Dafke this is put in this Mishnah. So first, let's explain Rab Shimon Heichi Kohen. Says the Gemara that the first statement of Rab Shimon, when he says when the Chachamim were lenient, they weren't lenient really. It's not that something was prohibited, but they were matir. They revealed that something was never prohibited to begin with. What does it refer to? Hassan Koyi. It goes to the Mishnah on Daf Nun Beis Amid Beis. What did we learn over there? You are coming from without the tchum. For you to be able to go back to your house, you don't have to make it to your house when Shabbos comes in, when it gets dark. You have to make it at least within the tchum of the city. Now, in those days, people actually measured the 2,000 amma beyond the boundaries of the city, and you have to know how to measure it. We're not even speaking about they used to use the ropes of 50 ammas. Aside of being a mumcha, surveyor, you have to know from where, with all of the details. You had burganim. How do you measure the end of the city? So they know all these dinim. And they measured 2,000 ammas, and then they would put on the ground a spike, a piece of wood that said on it, At Kam Tchum Shabbos. So if you live in the city, you're going for Ashpatzir, you'll see the marker and you'll stop there. So now the Mishnah is speaking about the opposite. You're running from outside into the city. You're trying to make it home before Shabbos, but it got dark. So if the Tanakh says, if you are even only 1 amma outside of it, lo yikanes, do not enter, because you're outside the Tchum Shabbos and you're stuck out there. Rab Shimon says, again on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, no, even if you are 15 amas or less close to the Tchum, you're not by the Tchum. 1 amma, 2 ammas, 3 ammas, up to 15 ammas, yikanes, you may enter the city, and therefore you may go home, because we say that that you are koinish visa in the city. There's a marker. You're not by the Tchum marker yet. Their surveyors did not give the full measure. Was it exactly 15 amas? Because they held the ropes, and therefore some of the rope was consumed in their hand. Approximate 15 amas. They didn't do it because Toyim are people who are going for a walk on Shabbos, and they are absent-minded people, and they don't stop by the marker. Sometimes inadvertently they would go beyond the boundary. So he gave lee room. Just in case they went beyond the boundaries, they should really still be within the Tchum. How much closer to the city did they put the Tchum? 15 amas. Which means wherever the marker is, you have 15 amas further. Now, the Ka'amar Tanakama lo yikanes, and Rab Shimon on him says that yes, yikanes, not only yikanes means you may come in, but as Tosfos points out, is you must come in, as we'll explain in a moment. So that's statement number 1. So Rab Shimon is explaining himself. I was lenient because really, it's not that there is a Tchum Derabanan issue. There isn't even a Tchum Derabanan issue. Now, there's always a doubt. Maybe these surveyors did place it accurately. There is a certain chashash, but we can be lenient by arguing that their surveyors, to begin with, they were stingy on the Tchum. Really, you are already within the Tchum. The final statement in the Mishnah, which is the 3 lines from the bottom of the Amid, that which is permitted in the Midrash is only rabbinic, but we don't permit biblical. Hey, chikoi, what is that referring to? It's referring to the Mishnah Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis. Hasam koi, the Amar Tanakama, that if a string of a musical instrument snaps on Shabbos, then the Tanakama holds you are even allowed to make a knot. Making a knot is an Isur D'Oraisa. And as we explained, we learned Rashi in the Mishnah, Ein Chanami. Normally, we're only learning about Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash. But since playing the musical instrument is part of the Avodah is Doicha Shabbos, not all Avodah, carbon Sibur. And therefore, just like the Avodah is Doicha Shabbos, we were learning the Shita similar to Rabbi Eliezer, not fully like Rabbi Eliezer. That Machshirei Mitzvah are also Doicha Shabbos if you could not have done it beforehand. So the Tanakama holds you can make a knot, make a kesher. And we learned Amalei Rab Shimon Oinva. That's a brayso that was quoted on Daf Kuf Beis. That the Gemara explained that is Rab Shimon. Explicitly, another brayso on Daf Kuf Gimel. Rab Shimon says you can only make a bow. So here Rab Shimon is being machmir. So the way Rashi learns, why lenient, why machmir? So he explains he was lenient, he was not lenient. By Tchum, he wasn't lenient. He really gave you what was already yours. Here, he says, Aniva, making a bow, making a bow will never lead you to violate a Isur D'Oraisa. Because a bow by default is not Shel Kayama. So therefore it's only an Isur D'Rabanan. And that's why in the Beis HaMikdash, Shorolei Rabbanan. But Kshira, making a knot, even if you make a knot and you won't leave it there for the Kayama time, Kesher Shel Kayama has to do with intent and with how long de facto it's there. So even if, however, you're going to figure out how to make a Kesher She'ena Shel Kayama, there is a risk that maybe the Asila Dechi of Chatos, so Rab Shimon holds that the Chachamim do not permit it for you. So again, it sounds like Rab Shimon is justifying why sometimes he was Machmer, sometimes he was Mekel. And this whole sugya is very difficult to understand on many levels, and that is, what's the Havamina to think that just because Rab Shimon is Machman in one halacha, he has to be Machman in all the halachas? Or if Rab Shimon is Mekel, if he's lenient in one area, does he have to be lenient in all the other areas? Why is this brought over here? Why is it brought in the Mishnah of Sheretz? Why are we concluding the whole Massechta ERUVIN with this? So the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos Chelik Yud Aleph says, Moidedik. First of all, this question, which is a Shas question, Kamus Eichus, quality, quantity, which one is more important? The Rebbe holds that Rab Shimon holds as a rule, with exceptions, but as a rule, kamus is machriya echus. And as we explained in the beginning of this year, or maybe in the last year, that the machloikis in the Mishnah regarding do you remove the sheretz with your gartel versus do you remove the sheretz with the wooden tongues? When you have to prioritize, it's not good. There's tuma here. Question is, what's worse? Is it making something else tamei that's an echus issue versus allowing the tuma to prolong longer? That's a kamus. There isn't more tuma, the echus, but it's going to stay there for longer. So which one do you pick? Rab Shimon he takes the svara that kamus is machriya echus, both in the positive and the negative. That means if you have to avoid violating a sin, it's better for you to avoid violating kamus if it's going to happen many times, which is prolonging, versus you violating a one-time act, which is making your gartel tummy. So he would opine like the Tana that holds, take it out with your gartel. And my friends, both of these dinim of Rab Shimon are connected to kamus and echus. So let's go first to the tchum. How is tchum related to kamus and echus? So the Rebbe explains that the reason why the Tur writes that it's a mitzvah to make an eruv chatzeros, we'll get to tchumen in a moment, is because it's a mitzvah to have pleasure on Shabbos. And when you make an eruv chatzeros, which will allow you more movement, you can take the food from your house to your chatzer. When you make a shituf muva'os, as we all know, when you rely on an eruv, it adds to tainug. The Rebbe extends that to tchumen. If the Tur says it's a mitzvah to make an eruv chatzeros, so the Rebbe says for sure it's a mitzvah to make an eruv tchumen, especially in the way that we're learning in the Mishnah on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, which is that if you are out there in the field, you're trying to make it home. Not making it home takes away your tainug. When Rab Shimon is lenient, which he is, and he says if you are already within 15 amas from the marker, you can already say you are in the city. He's doing that because if he would not do that, you would lose your tainug. For how long you would lose your tainug? For the whole Shabbos. So the loss of tainug is a kamus deke issue. The whole 25 hours of Shabbos, you're not going to have tainug. Breaking the tchum is a one-time violation. It's an echus deke violation. But since Rab Shimon holds that the ribui kamus is machriya miyut echus, so it's better for you. Now again, we're not saying that you're violating the tchum. Rab Shimon is explaining why the chachamim were lenient that you're not violating, but we are opening ourselves up, being more lenient regarding breaking a one-time tchum in order for you not to violate the whole 25 hours of Shabbos lacking tainug. Tainug is not as chamur as tchumen, but there's a kamus, it's a whole Shabbos lacking the tainug of you being home. So now we understand, says the Rebbe, why Rab Shimon needed the last statement that he made. Because now you can ask a kasha, since Rab Shimon says that kamus is machriya echos, so why did Rab Shimon say you make a bow? The Rebbe says beautiful that when you make a bow on a musical instrument, a bow is taka not kayama. You know what's going to happen? You're going to make a bow once, and on the same Shabbos, the bow will get unbowed. You're going to make it again and make it again. Making a bow means you're going to many times violate a isur derabanan of making a bow. Many times. Making a knot is an echos. You're not allowed to make a knot, but it's only if you make a knot, it's going to stay. So the Chura, Rab Shimon now has to justify himself. If I say that avoiding a sin bekamus is beribui kamus is better, even though it means you're going to have to break a din once be'echos, so now why doesn't Rab Shimon say that you make a bow, make a knot? Making a knot is a one-time echos dikat violation, but it's only a one-time violation. And that should be better than the whole time making a bow and making a bow and making a bow. So for that, Rab Shimon adds another important qualification. That when do I say that kamus is machriya echos? If both violations are midoiraisa or both violations are midrabanan. So now, kamus is machriya echos. But if one violation is midoiraisa, the other violation is midrabanan, even if the drabanan is going to be something that you're going to have to violate many times over, even though the doiraisa you're only violating once, never violate a doiraisa. Never violate a doiraisa. So that's why he writes these two statements. That final words of Rab Shimon, that shelo yitiru l'cha, by picking kamus over echos is only if they both would have been shvus. But when it comes to making a kesher already goes into a doiraisa. Making a bow never goes into a doiraisa. So Rabbi Shimon says, then don't make a kesher. Make a bow, and make a bow many times over, never violate a doiraisa. Now the Rebbe adds like this, Gavaldik, that we basically, ERUVIN is like a continuation of Shabbos. The Rebbe explains how all of the Melechas Shabbos are connected to Hoitza'ah, but then there's something unique, and that is Tchumen. Now I know we're speaking about making a knot, but that's one of the Lamates. All the Lamates is Hoitza'ah. The Rebbe explains, Al Viprinius, carrying means that you're bringing something from the Reshus HaRabim into the Reshus HaYachid. That is the mystical understanding of the problem of Hoitza'ah. In other words, that we're bringing something unholy in the domain of holiness. It's making a halal, a makim panoi in Kedusha. That's all of the Shabbos violations. That's something that may not be done. Whatever is unholy should never be brought into our lives. Tchumen means the opposite. That when you are living in a holy environment, as we all should, you have to have boundaries. There are places into which we may not go. Tchumen means that when you are in the city, don't go out there. Stay within a boundary. So there are two pratim here. Don't bring that which is unholy inside a makam of Kedusha, and don't take your holiness and put it in a place in the world where it doesn't belong. So says the Rebbe that after a year does the avoid of Shabbos, you learn Shabbos, hopefully b'pnimius, you learn the whole concept of ERUVIN, and you are already careful. That means a person clearly has boundaries. There's Kedusha and there's Klippa, and we have nothing to do with Klippa. A Yid should know that there's always the possibility in Golus that a Sheretz will be brought into the Beis HaMikdash. Not by you. Not by you. No, it's a person should never feel ich bin a greisa tzaddik. I'm not connected to Klippa. I'm keeping Shabbos. I'm not bringing Klippa into Kedusha. I'm not going out there. There's always a chance that a Sheretz should be found in the Mikdash. And the whole machlokes in the Mishnah, without getting into the details, look in Chelik Yud Aleph, is different ways of getting rid of it. But the conclusion of ERUVIN is that not only do we have the koyach to keep Shabbos and to keep ERUVIN, but if a Yid, like Pashat Tanya, you're davening and a machshava zara comes into your head. If something unholy is found in your life, we have the power to get rid of it in one moment. That b'shayta chada or b'riga chada, we have the koyach to get rid of a sheretz, and this will become completed. And that's really the whole concept of coming of Mashiach, when Vesruach Hatuva Amin Min Haaretz, that the differentiation between Kedusha and Klippa will be clearly marked, and ultimately Tumah will be completely annihilated. And may we merit, my friends, for that moment, and maybe adding Ulei B'derech Efsher, that we are beginning Psachim. The first Mishnah Psachim begins with Or La'arba Asar, Boit Kenes HaChametz. Boit Kenes HaChametz, the same concept. We want to get rid of the Chametz. Chametz is not a sheretz, even a more refined level of unkedusha that we have the koyach to get rid of it, and maybe just suggesting that what's the oir la'arba asar, or the light of the 14th. Really, it means the night going into the 14th. We know the Alter Rebbe was the 7th generation of the Maharal of Prague. The Rebbe is the 7th to the Alter Rebbe. Really doesn't fit because the Alter Rebbe himself is the same 7th and the 1st. But 7 and 7 al Pidrush is good enough, and maybe with the light of the Rebbe of the 14th, we will not only get rid of the sheretz, but we can also get rid of the chametz. Chavra Mazel Tov, and tomorrow morning, God willing, we will start with Masechtas Psachim.
Mazel Tov.
Wow.
Mazel Tov.
Did it.
Mazel Tov.
Did it.
Mazel Tov,
Mazel Tov, Rabbi.
Tomorrow at 6.